Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want life to be worse today than yesterday. Even people that commit are, what I observe is that they see that as a solution to the problem.
Welcome back to the Fight for Your City podcast. I have a new friend joining with me in the studio, Steve Roehm, who is the owner, therapist, counselor, social worker, a lot of different titles that people may throw at him. He runs Stability Counseling and Associates just across the border over in Henderson, Kentucky. Steve, thank you for joining us today, bud.
Thank you for having me.
All right, man. First off, I wanted to give some clarity. So you run a counseling service out of Henderson, Kentucky. Is it a secular counseling service where you're kind of taking anyone, or do you specialize in like Christian counseling?
No, it's open for everybody. We've served clients from probably as young as 2 or 3 up to elderly. We cover, for the most part, all mental health issues. There's nothing that's excluded. So we pretty much treat anybody that needs to be treated as long as we can provide that service.
Perfect. And with that, I'd like to ask, because this is something that came up a lot when I was in seminary going through school, because we took some counseling classes from some people. Is there any difference between Christian counseling and secular counseling?
I would assume so. I've never actually studied. I've never taken any courses in Christian counseling. I've never actually dug into that. I would assume that the foundation is Christian and the goal is to maybe increase discipleship, purity, that kind of thing. But I honestly am not sure. I would assume that the two are different, but I've never studied the others.
Yeah, often it was the debate always because we'd have kind of 2 different sets of classes where we had ethics, then we had Christian ethics, we had philosophy and Christian philosophy. So it was kind of always a running joke, like, because honestly, if you would cover one class, like the secular class, 90% of that would go over to the Christian. But it was just, the change was, how do we make that a Christian worldview? And I guess to me, that would be what people would think is, if you have one person who comes in who's, you know, maybe an atheist, maybe a humanist, different religion, different core values, then they're expecting something different. Whereas if you want a Christian, they're expecting someone to reflect a Christian worldview with them. So would there be any difference in you counseling someone who's a Christian, reflects your background, or someone who is an atheist?
Not my approach, no. I think that the core value, so I'm a social worker by education and by training. So I received my bachelor's and my master's degree in social work from USI. And then once I had my MSW, I had to get a CSW in Kentucky, which allowed me to start billing. And then once I had practiced for a couple of years, then I got my LCSW. So the social work ethics are different than, say, LPCA or LPCC ethics, which are different than LMFT. So you've got different trainings and different academic paths within the counseling world.
How do those ethics look different, if you don't mind me asking?
For the most part, they're very, very similar. I don't really know the nuance between them, but I know the primary value in each, or the primary ethical obligation, I guess, is number 1, to do no harm. Number 2, we can't push our values on other people. So, like, for example, I've got a large Christian themed tattoo on my arm.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, I wear my sleeves like this, or I have short sleeves, and so that's pretty visible. It's pretty obvious what my belief system is.
Well, if you covered up the cross, it could look Jewish.
It could. And you've got some Hebrew text there, and then you've got some English that's transcribed from Greek, and so you've got tetelestai, and your word is my life. And so for me, I can speak for me and what I do. And for social workers, that profession. So what we do is we can't push our values on people. So I have a number of clients, and I have over the years, that have come to me and they've wanted biblical counseling, pastoral counseling, discipleship. And so I'll always ask them at the very beginning, do you want me to counsel you? Do you want me to be a therapist, or do you want me to be a pastoral figure? Because you can have one or the other, but you can't have both.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand, counseling is not advice giving.
Oh, no.
That's not what being a counselor is. That's what people mistakenly think counselor is. Unfortunately, I think there's pastors that think that's what counseling is, and it's not. Tell me what real counseling is supposed to look like.
It looks like a lot of different things, man. I can tell you what it doesn't look like, though, and you hit the nail on the head. It does not look like advice. That's probably something that you would hear me say in just about every counseling session is a good therapist is not going to give you advice. And if you find a therapist that's going to give you advice, you might want to consider something different. And this is why. If I was to give a person advice on what to do, essentially, I should be willing to take responsible for the outcome. And that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me. So what I do is I try to help people. It just depends on kind of where they're at. If it's emotional dysregulation, if it's problem solving, if it's a personality disorder, there's lots of different reasons why people come to therapy. So what I do is I listen to what people need, and then I try to meet that need, not through advice giving, but through the concept of relationship and communication, conversation, and that kind of thing. Where those roads go, that's the fun part, man. That's the art of therapy.
Yeah, because it's their decision what they're deciding to do with their life. Yeah. So is there ever a time, though, where you have someone they're right there and you feel like you know what the answer is and you're just trying to hold back as much as possible to give that advice, to tell them what to do?
Not really. I do get where you're talking about a lot, just because, I mean, I've counseled probably maybe 35,000 hours worth of therapy. I taught for USI for 5 years. I've trained a number of clinicians, a couple of dozen at this point. And so I've had a lot of conversations. What I do is when people are having a hard time figuring out what decision to make, I'll just turn back to the basics, and I may help them do a pro-con list. I'll help them to look at, okay, if you do this, then this is reasonable to happen. If you do this, then this is the reasonable expectation. And then just kind of help them with foresight, see what could happen, and then what you feel fits you the best and what you feel like is going to solve the most problems and cause the least, that's what you get to choose to do. And then if it works, cool, we'll celebrate it. If it doesn't work, we'll figure out something different later.
Yeah. And I could picture that there might be instances where, like going back to if you're counseling someone who's maybe an atheist versus someone who's a Christian, I could see that there might be a time, though, especially when it comes to things that are so tied to religion, such as, let's just say, for example, marriage. In Christian marriage, it is that we are not really supportive of divorce, except for a few exceptions. I will say there are exceptions. But, for the most part, we want people to stay together. We want people to work through problems. We don't want people to give up. Whereas more in the secular world, there's not those religious ties. So therefore, if you're unhappy, what's there to keep you from splitting apart? So when you have maybe a couple that comes to you and they're needing advice of what to do, what's going to be that difference between a Christian couple who their values, they want to stick together, versus maybe an atheist who's like, I'm unhappy, I'm done, I want out?
Well, there's an assumption there that I'd like to kind of illuminate if I can. And the assumption is that the Christian couple came in and there's no sin there. Because when people come in for marriage counseling or couples counseling, for instance, it's typically so toxic and there's been so much damage done that it's hard to tell what you've really got.
So they're usually at the breaking point by the time they get to you.
My clients, they don't typically come in when things are starting to get bad. Usually they come in when things have gotten to the point where they're like, look, we can't do this anymore. We're talking about divorce. Maybe somebody's staying in a different house. They're trying to stay together, but at the same time, maybe the spark is gone, the love is not there, and maybe they're just trying to stay together for the kids. I see Christian couples that come in. I've probably worked with more Christian couples than non-Christian couples. And that in itself will tell you something.
Yeah, and let me guess that despite the fact that they're supposed to have maybe incredibly different values, they're mostly still the same and mostly the same problems?
Problems very similar, yeah. I mean, most of the time when people that I see come in for marriage counseling, they come in for one of three reasons, or there can be a combination of these three reasons, and it's the 3 A's. It's addiction, it's adultery, or it's abuse. And so when people come in, sometimes they want to stay together. Sometimes they just want an excuse to split up. They want permission.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah. And what of those three, because I can clearly see in my mind, like, okay, abuse. Like, I could see fully where someone is in such a toxic situation and they've been in it for so many years that they've thought that they're okay until something finally broke them and they need to feel like they're not crazy. I get that.
Yep.
And I could see maybe where that bleeds into addiction and adultery. I think all three of those are like, okay, like I'd understand. So what role do you play then in helping them in that decision process without telling them what to do?
So again, I always try to steer people towards making decisions that are going to solve the most problems and cause the least. That in itself is a clear, logical path. It's a practical path to find more peace. Every day is going to bring its own trouble. If we're making decisions along the way that are causing more problems and they solve them, we're adding trouble to trouble. We're adding stress to stress. So if we can practice seeing where our problem solving maybe is not quite working out, and we can start solving more problems than we cause, then we can get somewhere. So that's kind of where I always try to get. That's my landing spot.
Okay.
And now, what muddies that a lot of times is when there's resentment, when there's grudges, when there's unforgiveness, when you have those 3 A's, which I call those the relational killers. They have the potential to, from what I can see, the greatest potential to kill relationships. When you have those things and they haven't been processed, then all of those things that I just mentioned, the secrets, grudges, regrets, resentment, all that kind of thing, that has the potential to build up and to accumulate. And it can create such a toxic perception that even intimacy feels like abuse. And so, I mean, we can get into nuance if you want, but from kind of an overview, that's where I try to land, is trying to help people figure out, okay, even though I'm under stress, even though I've got this conflict and this toxicity, what are the decisions that I can make that are going to solve the most problems and cause the least?
Absolutely. One question that then comes to my mind is, they get to you, they're pretty much at their breaking point. They're at almost like marriage is at death's door, right? When they get to you in that moment, I know each situation's different, but what are the odds that their marriage is gonna survive this?
I would say it's directly related to the amount of abuse, adultery, and or addiction that's involved. If those three things are not present, or whether actual or perceived, then we got a pretty good shot.
Yeah.
The more those things are actual, then the more difficult it's going to be. So I see things in that regard on a spectrum. So on one hand, there's on one side of the spectrum, there's an absence of abuse, adultery, and addiction. Those are going to be the easiest times to work through the stress of whatever's going on, because those big, ugly beasts are not there. Then in the middle, you have perceived. This is where most of the people that I get are going to be from. Matter of fact, I would say one of the primary reasons that people come to me for marriage therapy is because there is a perception of especially adultery, but there may not have been any sexual intercourse. There may not have been any physical contact.
Yeah.
It's sexting, it's emotional affairs.
Yeah.
It's finding that happiness, that spark in a coworker or an employee or something like that, not your spouse. So that's the perceived part. That's in the middle. On the other end of the spectrum, that's where you have, it's evident that these things are happening. This person's living in addiction. They're living in alcoholism. There's either active or historical domestic violence, whatever the case may be. So you start with none, and then perceived, and then evident. And so the closer it gets to evident and the longer it stays there, the harder it's going to be able to right these wrongs.
Okay. And would you agree that a rule to live by is the earlier that they can identify those issues and get some kind of mediation, counseling, the better survival rate their marriage is probably going to have?
Yes, going all the way back to the initial impulse. So if you wait until oops happened, and now somebody is in, okay, I perceive that this has happened, or there's evidence that this has happened, it's way harder, even if it's just once. If as a couple you can come together and you can communicate and be vulnerable and transparent with the other person and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm having these thoughts, I'm having these feelings, and I'm not trying to scare you off, but can we talk and can we invite somebody, like if we can't make it work through it ourselves, can we invite a non-biased third party that we trust that would be able to help us? Because I want to make this work. If you wait until the toothpaste is out of the tube, it ain't going back in.
Yeah. What would toothpaste out of the tube be?
Oh, toothpaste, it's anything that could be perceived or evident addiction, adultery, or abuse.
So
If we're talking about those three topics,
yeah.
there's lots of other reasons why people come to counseling, but those three.
So getting caught could be one for the adultery. Addiction could be when it's actually like starting to affect finances heavily, or something's happened.
Yeah,
So those sort of things.
Or it's just there. So choose alcoholism. So you've got one partner in the relationship. I'm not going to choose the male or the female just to make it arbitrary. So you've got two people in a relationship. One of them is they're going home and they're not really tying one off every night, but they may be going through 4 to 8 beers a night, and they're getting a head change, they're getting a buzz, and then they're kind of passing out on the recliner or whatever, and that's where they sleep. So they wake up in the middle of the night and go to bed. The other spouse, pretty early on, is going to have to engage in some people-pleasing tactics in order to avoid the stress of the conversation. And what I mean by that, to be a people pleaser means that you're appeasing someone else at the cost of your own values. So the spouse that's watching the other spouse engage in this lifestyle where the spouse that's observing is being neglected, they're watching their significant other spend more intimate time with their bottles than they are with the spouse. Resentment, unforgiveness, a lot of negative emotions and thoughts can come up there. And so I would say that when that stress is first implemented because you're observing something that ought not be, then what you have is the toothpaste is starting to come out of the tube a little bit.
Okay. So with that, I wanted to ask this. Has there ever been a time or a couple that came to you and they were in such a bad way that despite any bit of a trial you could have, you thought, it's done?
Several.
And, and the follow-up to that is, and they surprised you and they actually made it through it.
Oh, golly. Not that I can think of offhand. I'm not going to say it's never happened.
Yeah.
But my mind is not coming to an example that I gave.
And you're thinking they would have had a lot better of a chance. A lot of those couples would have had a much better chance to get through what they were going through if they would have just gone earlier, if they would have sought help earlier before everything got out.
Yeah, that would be an important step. The step to take before that is, again, don't make decisions that are going to cause more problems than they solve. So if you look at any of the reasons why people come to counseling, it's going to be because they're experiencing stress in some variety of forms.
Yeah.
And that stress is the evidence that there is a problem. When all of your problems are solved, you've got peace. But when you have problems that are unsolved, now you've got stress.
Yeah.
The bigger the problem, the bigger the stress. The more chronic the problem, the more chronic the stress. The more acute the problem, the more acute the stress. And so if you can avoid the problem in the first place, there's no problem to solve. So a lot of times what I see is people, the problem is evident, it's there, and they're either trying to provide some kind of intervention or they're trying to escape the problem. And if you try to provide an intervention, but it's not successful, then the problem remains. If you try to escape the problem, you don't solve the problem remains. The best way to find that peace is to avoid problems in the first place. So kind of crossover ministry here a little bit. One of the principles that I stand by is holiness is a great way to prevent scars. Purity is a great way to prevent scars, and that doesn't need to be tied to a certain religious understanding or theology or anything like that. The idea that peace is something that is better than chaos that's the human experience, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder how I can make my life more difficult today. Everybody wakes up thinking, man, I wish it could be better. So spirituality is the quest to find value, meaning, or purpose in life. And so I would submit that every person, regardless of their religious identification and affiliation, are on a spiritual journey, because Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want life to be worse today than yesterday. Even people that commit suicide are, what I observe is that they see that as a solution to the problem. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's too much stress. It's too much heartache. It's too much pain. Yeah. It would be better if I wasn't here.
It's an escape. You think if I can do this, escape. Yeah, if I can do this, I don't have to feel this pain. I don't have to go through maybe a consequence that sits ahead of me. And that's not me saying that's not me saying that without empathy, of course.
No, and it's a horribly miserable existence to believe that your life is going to be better dead. There's going to be less pain with you not being alive anymore. On one hand, it's seductive because it seems like it might be true. But if you take a step back and you ask yourself the question, if I was to follow through with this, what harm is this going to cause? The answer is staggering.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing that's something you're seeing a lot of in counseling nowadays too. Are you seeing it more with the younger generation? Or are you seeing it more with the older generation?
I'd say it's probably pretty even. When COVID hit, the world changed. 2021, man, it was a hard year. It was a hard year for everybody. As a counselor working with, I had a large caseload at the time. I would say that for that entire year, approximately 75% of my conversations as a therapist involved suicidal ideation or suicidal intent. And it was almost never intentional. It was a stress response. People that had stress or anxiety or any kind of anxiety disorder, depressive disorder going into COVID, what I saw was those were exacerbated incredibly. And so whether it was children, teenagers, adults, suicidal ideation, self-harm behaviors, hospitalization, short-term and long-term, it's unbelievable, man. It's unbelievable. Now, things have kind of tapered off a little bit since then, but I have folks on my caseload now from youngest being in junior high, oldest being full-fledged adults. Stress, anxiety, suicidal ideation, those intrusive thoughts that just come and they're like, man, I've got this again. What do I do with this? It's a topic of conversation regularly. And so what do you think, because now we're kind of past COVID, we've kind of gone back to normal. There's always like some remnants that you see of, how things have changed kind of permanently, or at least for the long term. But what do you think has been driving it even pre-COVID? That suicide was increasing? Is it just exposure online? Is it just examples of it in the media? I would say that both of those have influences, relatively small. I would say that the biggest influence to suicidality in general is most people don't have a functional way to relieve stress, where they can do this thing and while doing that thing and or after doing that thing, they're like, I notice a difference. And if you can't find stress relief, then what happens is stress just accumulates in our central nervous system. As stress accumulates in our central nervous system through a process called allostasis, then our allostatic load builds. And as that builds, if we don't find relief, then both medical disorders and mental health disorders are likely to increase, become more acute, go from one thing into other things. There's all kinds of things. That happen.
You see, that's so strange to me when we talk about stress in the modern day. Because if you just looked at paper where we're at today and compare it to where we're at 200 and 100 years ago, you would think, what in the world do we have to be stressed about? We're working less than ever. Our quality of life is better than ever. We have more a lot of people, not saying all, but most of us have more free time on our hands than our grandparents ever did. Some of our grandparents were hand washing clothes and eating food that they were having to farm for themselves out of a large garden. So I think it's kind of crazy when you say that we have more stress than ever, because it would seem if you looked at just life 100 years ago on paper, we should have a less stress than ever before. So what's causing all of that?
Well, I don't know that there's more stress now than ever before. That'd be an interesting conversation, but
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily making that point.
It's relieving the stress.
It's relieving the stress. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there's a number of, there's a lot of influences there. You can, in no particular order, you could start with the food that you eat. The amount of sugar that we consume in the Western diet is absolutely incredible. And sugar is clearly evident in medical literature to influence inflammation in the body, especially in the blood vessels. So I'm not a medical professional, but through talking with doctors about my own care, I've learned about the process of atherosclerosis, which is where you have that plaque buildup in the arteries and the blood vessels. What largely leads to that, from my non-medical understanding, so I'm going to say that again because I don't want anybody thinking that this is advice. From my non-medical understanding, that atherosclerosis is at least one of the influences to that is a high sugar diet that's also high in fat.
So the physical affecting the mental.
Yeah, because as that buildup happens, as that inflammation happens in your blood vessels, your central nervous system interprets that as a stressor. So cortisol is released. Cortisol is the primary neurochemical or hormone that's related to all things stress. Once you get past stress and you get into fear, you get into anger, you get into that more intense emotion, now you're getting into adrenaline. It's a different thing, but cortisol and adrenaline also go hand in hand a lot of times too.
Wow. You see, that's really interesting, because I think, obviously we should know that all parts of our body all do connect to each other, that the mental can affect the physical, that the spiritual can affect our physical and our mental well-being. So it's so interesting to say that, because my first thought is never food. But at the same time, I can see where that would be a real thing. So that would be a big difference then between 100 years ago. We weren't eating as much sugar. We were probably more active than ever because it was a lot more manual labor.
Activity is huge.
Yeah, because I can even feel it now. I've spent the last year and some change, working from home at a desk where you're sitting down for 6, 8, 10 hours a day, and even people who are working desk jobs, that's just what they're doing. If you're a secretary, whatever. So
we're a largely sedentary culture, and when we're sedentary, it impairs our body's circulatory system from functioning the way that it's supposed to. What I talk to every single client about, and so I'll kind of cut right to stress relief. And we could talk more about food, pesticides, herbicides, how the ground is too overly worked, and so a lot of times it doesn't have the nutrients in it that it needs to have. So then when you're eating food that's grown from the ground, what it's advertised to have is not oftentimes what it actually contains, because it's not being raised in soil that's able to produce those minerals and vitamins. We could go on and on about it, but so stress relief. About a year ago, I stopped doing resistance training. I'd been into resistance training pretty much my whole life, and so I wanted to focus on heart health, circulatory health, and really trying to reduce my cortisol, trying to relieve my stress. And so what I started doing is really largely two different things. There's more than this. But, well, three things. Number one, I changed my diet. I eat very, very little sugar, even if it's coming from a natural source. Number two, I walk daily, at least 30 minutes a day, at least 4 days a week. That's a clinical regimen called behavioral activation, where you get your heart rate up into heart rate zone 2 or maybe into zone 3 for at least 30 minutes at a time. And it makes your brain release two primary chemicals. One is called GABA and the other one is called endocannabinoids or anandamide. Both of those, I can explain what they do to your amygdala and to your prefrontal cortex. They're both really good things. The third thing is gratitude. It's the sincere expression of gratitude. What I talk to every client about are these things. We talk about diet, we talk about sleep, we talk about walking, we talk about gratitude. Show me somebody that walks daily and expresses gratitude about the stressful things that they're experiencing in life, and I'll show you somebody that rises above the storm.
Wow. You see, I think that's just something, what you said is so simple. It's like it's not, it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything to go on a walk. It doesn't cost anything. You doesn't take an expensive gym membership. It doesn't cost anything to be grateful. And I think for at least a lot of us, I know there's a lot of topic nowadays. I'm paying more for groceries than I ever have before. But I mean, I think really what you're talking about, even a whole foods diet, it will lead to a even more cheaper lifestyle.
Yes.
Which then I think also does help, even like what I think is the stressor for a lot of people, which is finances nowadays, especially if you live in Southern Indiana during some things right now. But I mean, I think those are great ways for people to start. If I can, I want to tie it back to the ministry perspective. One of the things that was always talked to me about in school is know your limits as a pastor. So people are going to come to you for counseling. And I remember the first time I sat down with someone for pastoral counseling. It was an older woman. I was in my early 20s, and she kind of let forth her life story to me. And I got to be honest with you, I won't go into details, but I was in shock. I was just in shock about how much trauma like this woman had gone through. And it hurt me to my core to hear about it. And one of the things that was always taught me by professors is know your limit, know that you aren't, that all that can be, and know when to advise someone to go to somewhere else, to go to a professional counselor. So for some of the pastors who are watching, what would you say to them in terms of knowing when to advise them to go to a professional?
Well, I think the first step is, number one, to be aware. Notice that when you're entering into unknown territory and you haven't been here before and you're not really sure what to do, you communicate that with the person that you're talking to. And you give them the opportunity to kind of roll that over and bounce it around and figure out what they want to do. Because at the end of the day, we do have the right to stop providing services. But the best way to do it, if at all possible, is to have that conversation so that the client that you're talking to, or the parishioner, or whatever you want to call them, so that they have the ability to give you informed consent. And so I would say that's the two-step process. Number one, be aware. Number two, have that conversation with them. Number three, I don't know anything about the pastoral counseling world, but if I could give a principle there that if it's not present, I think would be very, very helpful. That is to have someone that's supervising you, someone that you're being transparent with, you're being vulnerable with, you're being honest with, and you're sharing with them what your process is so that they can help you to grow. In counseling, that's something that we have to have. When we start providing therapy, we have to do so under the supervision of autonomous clinicians. Those are people that they've earned their license, they have the ability to practice freely. They have more experience. They should have more wisdom.
Surround yourself with smarter people.
In a multitude of counsel, there's wisdom.
Yes.
And so if you need at least one person. So if I was speaking to pastors, I would say, pastor, have at least one person that you can be honest, vulnerable, and transparent with in an ongoing way, looking at them as a supervisor who you're yielding to, so that you can have somebody that is covering your 6 and your 3 and your whatever. Because the last thing you want is to be practicing with people on an island. Don't want that. That's danger is present on islands. When you've got a community, there's a lot more safety.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to touch on as well, I come from the younger generation. I'm technically the oldest of I'm one of the oldest members of what people are calling Gen Z now, which is kind of a generation that's identified with the new rise in social media, people who live on their phones constantly. And one thing that I've begun to see among some people who mostly they're younger than me is you kind of see a rise in what would be called disorders, and it becoming a popular trend to associate yourself with that, even when it's not accurate. So many people call themselves ADHD. People call themselves autistic. It was a trend to kind of be depressed, act depressed. Everyone's obsessed with death and suicide and all this other stuff. What are some reasons you think that it's become a trend to have a disorder that real life people are actually struggling with every day?
If it's not organic, if it's not an organic mental health disorder, and you're looking at any of the other influences that you're talking about, you're looking at social contagion, you're looking at the context of our current society, you're looking at the influence of all the things that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that could be said. What I would start with is the idea that most people don't really know who they are. And when you don't know who you are, you're likely to believe that you are what seems the most appealing. Yeah. And when you settle for that, coming back to the spiritual side, you're missing the bigger purpose. There's nobody that was born and destined to be just bipolar, to just be anxious, to just diagnose themselves on TikTok. You know, it's the TikTok diagnostic world. You know what I mean? I tell people all the time, stop listening to Prophet TikTok. It's not going to tell you the truth. If you want to talk about disorders, diagnosis, come in, we'll sit down, we'll break out the DSM-5, and we'll go through the actual criteria if you want. Yeah. And if it fits, then we'll figure out what to do with that. But if it don't fit, friend, don't wear it.
Yeah. And I think it's a thing too. And I'm kind of in between. I disclosed to you before that my sister is trying to be a psychologist right now, and we get into it all the time because, you know, I somewhat get, I somewhat like some of the arguments that we live in a world where maybe we're a little too much diagnosed today. Like we're overdiagnosed. That there's so many quote unquote disorders that we can have. You know, I even talk about it with my teacher friends sometimes, where so many boys get diagnosed with ADHD and they describe what the kid is dealing with. And you're like, it just sounds like a young boy who needs more recess time to me, or needs to spend more time outside. So in your professional opinion, am I crazy for thinking that? Do I need to check myself?
No, I don't think it's crazy. I think that it's more nuanced than that. I think that when people are, I'm kind of going to echo what I said a minute ago. When people settle for a less than ideal identity, they're going to experience a less than ideal life. And so it is possible for even a secular counselor to help people identify what they believe the ideal life experience is. Now, as a Christian, even that's going to vary. But if you look at other religions or even non-religious peoples, they're still going to have an idea of what is the best possible life that I can experience. And regardless of who you are, that's what I'm going to try to help you find. Yeah. And so that's kind of it. I would say at the core of what I do a lot of times too, is I try to help people to not settle for an identity that isn't as good as what could be out there. You know, I'm trying to find, instead of settling for better, let's strive for best.
Yeah. You mentioned that we don't know how to deal with stress nowadays. We're not taking the right approaches. Just touched a little bit over the struggle with identity and sometimes diagnosing ourselves, overdiagnosing ourselves. Do you think as a professional that nowadays when we're dealing with our mental health that we're over-medicated in trying to deal with those issues?
I think it's distinctly possible. The purpose of medication, when you're talking about psychotropic medication, should be to help you to be able to then learn skills, thought processes, emotional regulation skills, stress relief tactics, whatever you need in order to no longer be on the medicine. Now, that takes a lot of times, it takes significant amounts of time, but the goal should always be, let's help this person to get to the type of lifestyle where they have the least amount of outside interventions going on. If somebody can be sustained and have a high quality of life with just their normal lifestyle, that's where every helping professional field should be trying to get them to go. It's when I started getting trained to do therapy, I was trained to work myself out of a job, and I've kept the same attitude ever since. Yeah. And so I don't know if that's what we see all the time. I don't know if that's the mindset that we see from all of our medical and behavioral health professionals. Sometimes it does appear that there are practitioners and even systems out there that are geared not towards curing, but geared towards maintaining, so that you can keep that client come in and you can keep your books full. And so that's a dicey one right there.
It is,
but it's
Well, I think that's
I think it's evident.
I think that's the accusation, though, that a lot of people, would have, is that I don't want to go to therapy because, unlike a doctor or a hospital where I'm trying to get out as quick as I can and be healthy, therapy kind of can trap me here to where I'm always having to come back, and it becomes a subscription service to make me feel okay. And I even feel sometimes that I don't think this is done necessarily on purpose. I think it's just how culture is, where I've seen therapists almost take on the role as pastors or spiritual advisors. I remember there was a girl one time I had heard about. She was on the fence of breaking up with her boyfriend. And a girl that I was pastoring at the time was her friend, was talking with her about it. And she said, well, what do you mean you're on the fence about it? She goes, well, I think I'm going to break up with him, but I need to talk to my therapist first about it. And she'd ask, well, why don't you pray about it first? And that idea of seeking a spiritual help was just completely like alien to her. And I'm not saying that all therapists are like this, or it's like this for everyone who goes to therapy. Certainly not. But I am seeing that more, where a lot of people are relying on a counselor or a therapist to, certainly a lot of them are guiding them, but they're expecting them to tell them what to do, to tell them what they want to hear.
They want permission.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want permission to do what they feel like they already want to do. They want permission to follow their preference. And yeah, I mean, I think that those two can, and especially in our current culture, they should go together. If there's anything that we have as many of as pastors, it's therapists. There's so many of both out there. And there's no reason that there can't be communication between the two. There's no reason that both of those entities can't be on the same team. And I would make the case that it's going to be better treatment if both of those voices are coming together, because that's what helps our clients grow the most, is when you've got the professionals and the natural supports in their life that come together and they have that collaborative conversation, because then that person is what that does is it helps the person not to overvalue certain voices and undervalue other ones. And that's kind of, I think, part of what you're getting at is we have a tendency to overvalue some voices and undervalue others. But the same could be said for ministry and pastors too. I can tell you a number of stories about people who have gotten all kinds of messed up because they simply overvalued the voice of what's speaking to them from the pulpit. They don't think for themselves. They don't study for themselves. They don't have, they're kind of living vicariously through their minister, or they're absolutely doing it. And now try to convince them that there's something that they're, it's a different place, man. It's a different place.
I think it goes back to what you said too. The point of counseling is not to give advice. And unfortunately, I've met a lot of ministers that just simply they don't want to work with you through something. They want to tell you what to do. And if you don't do what they say, then you can't be a part of their leadership or their church. And to me, that's a whole nother conversation about toxic church cultures. But, with that, I'd like to ask this. So as someone who has had to be a pastor and had to be a counselor in some cases, what are some of those ways when you talk about not giving advice, but kind of knowing that person's core values, knowing their story, and when they are coming to you to get permission to do something that does not fit their core values, that internally it's not what God wants for them, how can you help steer that conversation in a non-manipulative way, of course, but also not telling them what to do? How do you kind of get them back on a track where they're meeting back with those core values?
Well, I think it kind of starts with how you frame your questions. Or your statements for that matter. Number one, questions are better for clients than answers are.
Wow.
People are better served when they can find their own answers than when you give them the answer. Now, sometimes people need the answer, but I would speculate that those are fewer and further between. So one example of that is, instead of saying, hey, why don't you consider trying this? Say, hey, what do you think might happen if you tried this? Or, hey, I've noticed that over the course of our conversation, these appear to be some of your values. And so part of the way that we can see what people value is by what they stress about. If you look up the definition for stress, it literally means a thing cared for.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And so if you listen to people enough and you find out what they perceive as problems, then the inverse of that is going to be what they value. But they're also going to perceive that they lack that. And so if you can illustrate that in conversation, then you can illustrate their core values without putting anything new on them. And then you could say, instead of, hey, why don't you try this? Say, what do you think would happen if you acted on that value?
Wow.
Say you've got the value of being honest, but you're having a hard time being transparent with your spouse because you've got these impulses. Go back to like the adultery thing and trying to get it before it happens.
Yeah.
What would happen if you took that same value of honesty and you communicated with your spouse, knowing that, hey, man, it's going to be a difficult conversation, but what do you think might happen out of that?
Wow.
And then you just turn it into you put it back on them. So you take what you're hearing from them, read between the lines a little bit, put it back on them, and ask them a question.
Yeah. Because I always found like when I went through counseling, that's kind of one thing I realized that is it's really not me kind of getting outside counsel or advice, like we've said, but it's really they've helped me take what's ever in my mind, whatever I'm trying to think through, and then kind of through those questioning like that, I'm just letting it out. And you begin to realize that even when you were trying to convince yourself you wanted all the wrong things or you just wanted permission, like you said, to do stuff, you really find out through that questioning, that's really not what I want. And even sometimes you find those deep-seated convictions in you that for stress, whatever, the world, whatever you want to say, it was blocking me from knowing what I really knew I needed to do. So that's so good. I think that a lot of people will take that. I think it's going to transform even not just the counselors or the pastors out there, but just your day-to-day Christians to transform how they're talking with their kids, how they're talking with their spouse.
For sure. So there's a whole field of therapy within mindfulness that's called values-based mindfulness. And when you have values-based mindfulness, it's literally this cut and dry. You talk with the client about identifying what their core values are. And then once they've identified those core values, you help them to identify, I usually go with 3 different ways that they can express those values intentionally on a daily basis in various settings. So say somebody has the core value of, it's the golden rule, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. So you're trying to love everybody. So how do you love the gas station attendant?
Yeah.
It's different than how you're going to love your kid or your spouse, right? And so you look at the context of their life, but you help them to figure out how to intentionally live according to their values. Most of the Christians that I know, most of the human beings that I know, live on what I call brain neutral. They're just kind of going through life and things just kind of happen the way that they do. And they're not really trying to live according to what their values are. Yeah, they'll pray. Yeah, they'll worship. Yeah, they'll lift up their hands to the slow songs and jump up and down to the fast songs. But when you're looking at the actual day-to-day, say like Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon, where you're just tired and you're at work and you're not really thinking about what your core values are. And so you're just kind of being, you're just kind of on brain neutral. When a person takes their core values and they live according to those on purpose, most of the time good results are going to happen. And when you do that, you go a little bit closer to fulfillment.
Yeah.
You go a little bit closer to peace. You go a little bit closer to content, because what we value the most is what should shape our character. The more we violate that and the more we do what we know we ought not to do, the more we experience value conflict, stress, and that's where we get into a headspace where like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. The person that knows to do good and does it not, to him it's sin. How many people do we know that they know to do well, they know to do good, they know what their core values are, and they haven't left them behind, they just ain't using them.
Absolutely. One final question. I think this will kind of be maybe a lengthy part of it too, but one thing that I always think about is the families and the couples that know that their relationships at death's door, whether it be a father knowing he's about to lose his son, whether it's a mom that's worried about her daughter taking her own life. It's a couple where the wife knows that the husband is deep in addiction or he's cheating on her or vice versa. And they know like if they don't get this fixed, then not only is their marriage going to die, they're afraid their spouse is going to die.
Life's going to fall apart.
Yeah, spiritually or physically in that. And they get to that point and they can't get their loved one to go to counseling. They can't go there to get help. What would you tell someone who's trying to get their loved one to go to counseling, but they refuse to go?
That's a good question. With the way that you presented it, the context there, and I know we're talking about hypotheticals, but we're hypothetically talking about the context of it's dire. We're in dire straits here. This is the worst case scenario, and it's happening. What I would say to do is, number one, plant that seed, but realize that it's your role to plant a seed, not to make that seed become fruitful.
Yeah.
When somebody tries to do too much with that seed, it's overbearing.
Well,
One of the, I would say, and this, I get a lot of wows on this because people ask me, what do you think is the main reason that people come in for therapy? What I see most often is they have an overbearing spouse, or they were raised by an overbearing parent, or both.
well,
And it's not about the expression of the communication, it's about the perception.
yeah.
When people perceive that they don't have any wiggle room, they don't have agency in their relationship anymore, they have to do this, and it doesn't matter if they want to or not, but if they don't do it, then bad things are going to happen, then now they kind of feel like they're being coerced.
Yeah.
One of the best things to do is simply plant seeds, and number two, you carry yourself in that relationship the best that you possibly can. And you, whatever that looks like for you, if I was, and I know that we've been talking about not giving advice, but I believe that the ideal is to love them unconditionally, even if you end up losing the relationship.
Wow.
Don't do what you're doing to save the relationship. Do what you're doing because it's the right thing to do. This is your core value. This is who you are. This is why you're here. And so, especially if you believe in love, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, people having the agency to decide what they're going to do and not feel like they're being oppressed into making a certain decision, then you got to be able to live by those even when the chips are down.
Yeah.
And that's not as easy to do as it is to say. I 100% acknowledge that, but I don't know a better way.
Absolutely. This goes along with that as well. You're absolutely right. We can't make someone get better. I can be concerned with someone's physical health. I cannot force them into a gym or to diet. I can want someone in my life to be free from addiction. I can't make that decision for them. With that in mind, when would you say to a person, or you wouldn't say this to a person, but lead them through it? How would you talk to someone who it would be in their best interest at this time to let go of that relationship?
I won't lead them through it, but I'll walk with them through it.
Yeah.
They're always going to be leading. I'm following, or at best I'm walking beside you. But for the most part, I'm about a half step back. That way I can see where you're turning, stopping, going, all the things. But you're in control of your own life. I'm not.
Yeah.
So if I start leading you, I kind of go back to that advice thing. It's a form of advice, even if it's implicit, not explicit. So if I was to start doing that, then I'm automatically, I should be willing to take responsibility for what happens. So I lead them, but it's the same thing that I've talked to you before. Hey man, or hey lady, I see where you're going, and I'm not going to try to dissuade you from doing it, but let's talk about it one more time. Let's look at what happens based on what decision that you make. And what I encourage people to do, and I get very little implementation of this, very, very rarely. It goes back to the gratitude thing. When a person is able and willing to consistently and sincerely express gratitude for especially the things that cause stress and discomfort in life, it changes our perception of those things. So if there's a person that's listening to this that maybe they feel like they're in that spot that you're describing, and they feel like they've basically done everything that they could do to encourage their loved one to do what they need to do to get better, and they're just not. My encouragement to you would be, even in their mess, even in their dysfunction, even in, call it sin, call it whatever you want to call it, give thanks for them sincerely. Because what that will do, it will not change them directly, but it will change you. And as it changes you directly, you then become an example for them, because now, instead of fussing at them, instead of griping at them, instead of forcing them, instead of coercing them, instead of all those things, and I'm not saying that it's going to cut all that out, but I'm saying at time it might be able to. If they see you demonstrating patience and restraint and love instead of the coercion and the manipulation and the overbearing behavior, they're going to notice a difference. And that in itself is going to be a seed. The sincere expression of gratitude, there is an abundance of data in the clinical world that demonstrates that sincere act is able to both generate and strengthen neural pathways that lead to a higher quality of life. It literally will change your perception. It changes the way that your prefrontal cortex is exercising insight. Like, we could go so deep into that, but that would be the number one thing that I would ask is, even in the mess, express gratitude for it. From a Christian perspective, a cursory study of the New Testament will indicate that we are to give thanks at all times, in all circumstances, and for all people. And when you really take that seriously and you take that at face value and you practice it, I promise you it'll change your life.
Can't think of a better way to end than that. So, Steve, I appreciate you coming on, sharing so much advice. I know we haven't said advice, but advice, wisdom.
It wasn't that.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and I'd love to see you again sometime.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.